Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Kinda Murdery, a true crime podcast that's mostly about murder, and always about the strange and compelling stories that arise when the path less traveled twists to darkness, and those who walk its shadows surrender to violence and corruption. We have a perilous journey ahead, so thank you for lending me your courage and good company. I was listening to an episode of Monsters Among Us this morning, and at the beginning of the show, Derek Hayes says, coming to you nearly live from the Lake Arrowhead area of Southern California, and I like that, so just for today, I'm going to steal it. Welcome all, I'm your host Zevin Odelberg, this is Kinda Murdery, and I'm coming to you nearly live from the San Diego area of Southern California. Gee, that was fun. Now today I present to you a Kinda Murdery classic, The Decapitation of Eddie King. And while the show may be nearly live, Eddie, I assure you, was very much dead. His body was found headless in the Samoa Dunes up in Humboldt County, Northern California. And it took a while for the authorities to even figure out it was Eddie, let alone catch his killer. But ultimately, they did both. This episode originally aired on March 13th, 2022. It's a heck of a story, and Derek Hayes from Monsters Among Us podcast is my guest. Enjoy Kinda Murdery's The Decapitation of Eddie King. Guest starring Derek Hayes from Monsters Among Us podcast.
California's rugged and scenic northwestern corner is the beginning of the great Pacific Northwest. A region of untamed and primitive beauty.
And the Humboldt County Sheriff's Department has now joined efforts with the Arcata
pot
Police.
growers living off the grid. Humboldt County also has the highest rate of missing person cases in the state.
Where 60% of marijuana is grown in the United States.
There's a lot of evil here. A lot of evil.
This is Kinda Murdery, and you're entering the Emerald Triangle. Wow, that was nuts. Hey everybody, welcome to Kinda Murdery. I'm your host Zevin Odelberg. Thank you for deciding to be here. Today, we will be visiting the town of Samoa, California. Now, just across Humboldt Bay from Eureka, California, on a narrow peninsula in a tsunami zone, and butted up against the sand dunes, sit the coastal hamlets of Manila and Samoa, California. Given that the Pacific Ocean waters there are frigid, 52 degrees, the weather is mostly foggy, windy, rainy, chilly, and the sands are gray, the irony of their Polynesian paradise names is not lost on the fewer than 1,000 combined residents of both communities. Once upon a time, in the decades immediately before and after the dawn of the 20th century, in the heyday of the redwood timber industry, flush with logger-bearing wealth, Samoa was known as Coney Island West. Today, modern Samoa is functionally a ghost town. In fact, in Samoa, ghost town is much more than just a general designation. The place is famously haunted. In particular, a street of abandoned row houses known as Cadman Court. Enter one of these desolate structures at your own risk, and you might find the walls splattered with dried black splashes of old blood. Evidence of clandestine ceremonies performed even now by covens of witches from Eureka, who descend on Samoa's Cadman Court and meet secretly at house number 18, drawing upon its dark spiritual energy to perform witchcraft and ritualistic animal sacrifice. Witches sacrificing chickens in abandoned ghost town haunted houses seems like the perfect segue to introduce my guest today. It's the Prince of the Paranormal, the Maestro of Monsters, the King of the Things that Go Bump in the Night, Mr. Derek Hayes from the Monsters Among Us podcast. Hey, Derek, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, Zevin, I appreciate it, and I think I'm going to steal each and every one of those introductions right there. Those were perfect.
I had fun coming up with them. I was particularly proud of the king of the things that go bump in the night.
That was my favorite one, honestly. And, you know, I I write constantly for the show, and I have such a hard time coming up with new phrases and stuff like that. I feel myself repeating over and over. So congratulations on that. That's a winner.
Thank you so much. So, MAU, as it's known by its legion of fans, Monsters Among Us, and I'm part of that legion, by the way, as are my wife and daughter. Now, are you on break at the moment? Am I right about that?
We come back today. Actually, I think the new episode posted as we're recording this. I think Sarah's upstairs toiling away getting that thing posted, and we're coming back with a special episode, Tales of the Cloth, which is all religious-based stories. You have churches, possessions, that kind of thing.
Ooh, I love that stuff. The mythos of it all.
Yeah.
The angels and the demons and the possessions and just kind of the epic proportions.
I'm the same way, and I think I start the show saying something similar. I'm not a religious person, but the historical aspect of it and the, I don't want to say pageantry, that's not the right word, but the ritual of everything, it just fascinates me. And, there's a lot of interest there, and there's a lot of, I'll call it magic for lack of a better term, but there's a lot of energy, a lot of synergy, whatever it is out there. There's some sort of energy connected to that even somebody like me that's not religious can feel and can appreciate.
As a huge fan of the paranormal or of true crime too, it's something about these stories that have an incredible amount of emotional leverage.
Yeah.
That's what the angels and demons and all the history and all the blood and all of that.
Yeah. Some wild stories, too. I mean, if you really break it down, there's some wild stories out there.
Speaking of wild stories, so this season of Kinda Murdery is set in the Emerald Triangle, the combination of Mendocino, Trinity, and Humboldt counties. Now, Humboldt County, besides being the epicenter of the weed business, is allegedly home to Bigfoot. Derek, have you run across many cryptids in the Pacific Northwest during your illustrious career?
You touched on it there. I mean, if you were going to have a monster from that area, it's obviously Bigfoot. Willow Creek is in that area. I can't tell you exactly which county it's in, but that's the Bigfoot Central, essentially. If you go to Willow Creek, every corner has a statue or a painting of Bigfoot. There's museums, there's bookstores, and it's near where the Patterson-Gimlin film was shot in 1967, was in that same area. So, Bigfoot's king in that area for sure, as far as anything spooky is concerned.
Absolutely true. Well, Willow Creek is in fact in Humboldt County, as is Samoa, where we're going today. Shall we jump into our story of murder and mayhem in Samoa, California?
I can't wait.
All right.
Can't wait for some murder.
Well, then you're in luck, because the show's called Kinda Murdery, and this is the story of the murder of Edward King, a small-time drug dealer from Eureka, who was killed in Samoa, decapitated, and buried in the sand dunes, but possibly not in that order. And to tell you this horribly fascinating tale, I'm going to begin by taking us back to Eureka, California on June 12, 1968. Here's what happened. The North Coast Mercantile Company at 225 First Street reported to the police that 6 cases of beer had been stolen from their warehouse.
1311, come in.
Later that night, a noise complaint called in from a nearby residential neighborhood, where the police find 6 teenagers between the ages of 18 and 19 having a house party with 6 cases of beer, matching the description of those that went missing from the North Coast Mercantile. Case each. It's not a bad showing. Well, the youths are arrested for disturbing the peace and arraigned on burglary charges related to the stolen beer. It all sounds relatively harmless, right? Maybe good fun, adolescent hijinks of a group of rascally friends basking in the invulnerability of being 19. Peak testosterone levels, right? Look, be honest with me, Derek. Did you ever steal booze as a teenager?
No, sadly I didn't. I was very boring as a teenager. I worked a lot, quite frankly. I think I had like 3 jobs when I was in high school at the same time, so I was always super busy. I was interested in creating things and that kind. I didn't have time for trouble. That changed when I reached college, however. But when I was in high school, when I was that age, I was a good kid.
No time to be shotgunning a case of Blatz with your buddies. Yeah.
No, that came like 2 years later, and it was probably Keystone or Natty Light.
Perfect. I feel better. So, of these 6 beer bandits, right, one of them had a much darker path then youthful hijinks ahead of him. Much darker than a noisy night of drunken revelry with the boys. He was 19 then. His name was Freddie L. Kopic. And the first part of Edward King's murder story is made up of Freddie's facts. Now, I'm calling them Freddie's facts because at this point in human history, Derek, I think we all understand that even if no one is lying, and often someone is, the facts of a story can vary dramatically depending on who's doing the telling.
Yeah. What's the saying? History's written by the victors. I mean,
Right.
Nobody wants to hear what the people that lost their lives has to say about history. So, kind of applies here, I guess.
Yeah, I think it does. Yikes, that's dark. Right on theme for the show. It makes me wonder, have you ever had, because I know on MAU you have listeners call in and tell you their real-life paranormal experiences, right?
Yeah.
So have you ever had two different people call in describing the exact same paranormal occurrence with a totally different sequence of events or understanding or explanation? Is that ever, something like that ever happened?
Actually, weirdly enough, it happens all the time, and we end up with certain themes. We ended up with the Mirrored Men that way. A couple people just started calling in, and all these stories seem very similar, so we just kind of lumped them all in, and before you knew it, it sort of created this character and this world that these entities or whatever these things are exist in. And then it happens at a lighter scale, too. Recently, toward the end of season 12, I had two separate calls where somebody saw a person turn into a cat and walk away. And
Whoa.
Those two calls came within, a couple hours of each other from across the country. One was in the South somewhere, and one was in Michigan. So
That's intense.
Yeah, it does happen.
So you're telling me that Professor McGonagall has a twin sister?
Pretty much.
Is that the takeaway?
That's what we're getting at. Yeah.
All right, let's get back to the murder of Edward King here. So in November of 1971, 3 years after the beer heist, Edward Leon King was a 21-year-old drug dealer based out of Eureka. King had a bad reputation as a drug dealer, even among other drug dealers. Now, I don't mean a bad reputation like Tony Montana. Not bad like he was a man to be feared. Edward was the nervous sort. He had a bad reputation for adulterating his merchandise and cheating his customers where he could. Probably what made him nervous. That kind of business practice can get you killed in any industry, but especially in narcotics. In fact, seems like Edward's lack of honor among thieves, or I guess a fair deal among dealers, if you will, were catching up to him. Shortly before his murder, his mother said he was planning to leave town for fear of violence. It's clear now that he didn't leave town quickly enough. Early November 1971, Edward King left home in his car and drove out to Samoa near the dunes. He never returned home, but mysteriously, his car did. When King was reported missing, Sergeant Graham of the Eureka Police spoke to Freddie Kopic, our man from the teenage beer heist 3 years earlier, who was now a known associate of King's in the Humboldt drug trade. Kopic steadfastly denied any knowledge of King's whereabouts. Shortly thereafter, King's mother notified police of blood on the seat of her son's car, but there was no sign of him, and no body was found. Then, almost a year later, in October of 1972, a headless skeleton, still wearing clothes and jewelry, was found buried in a shallow grave in the Samoa sand dunes. Police suspected it could be the missing man, Edward King, and when King's sister identified the clothing and jewelry as matching what King had been wearing when he went missing, they were sure of it. But was it really King? Where was his head?
That's a good question. Sorry,
It
I
is.
didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's a good question.
No, please. It's a good question. How do you positively identify a body with no head, right?
Well, my first thought here is, I'm always thinking problem solving, kind of come up with solutions here. It almost sounds like this is the first step to faking your own death. A body with your jewelry and your clothing and no head. That would be the first. I don't know how this ends, but that's the first step to faking your death, in my opinion.
gift your outfit and your bling to someone else, a transient or somebody, then murder them,
dig somebody
the body
up if you have to. I mean, wherever you find bones, you don't even need a body at that point.
A way for him to escape the violence that he saw coming. Faking your own death. It's a tried and true classic, in fact.
It's safer than skipping town.
Count of Monte Cristo. So where was that head? Well, on November 14th, 1971, about 11 months before the body was found, 22-year-old Freddie Kopic and 40-year-old Clayton Rumbaugh were driving from Arcata to Eureka, planning to meet up with King near the dunes in Samoa to buy drugs. They were repeat customers, and King knew them well. According to Kopic, the older man, Rumbaugh, was furious with King for previously cheating him out of $2 by selling him fake LSD. Apparently, there was nothing on the tabs.
That's quite the grift right there. Depending on the person's imagination, you might be able to get away with it.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Hey, or depending on how messed up they are in general, maybe it was great acid and he was too tweaked out or something to even notice.
That possibly could have happened too. Placebo effect.
Now, that real versus fake question, one of the things that I find so captivating about Monsters Among Us is how utterly credible the callers that you choose are. But I imagine as you listen to these calls, the issue of real versus fake must come up. And I'm curious how you navigate that. Like, how do you spot somebody that's just trying to catch your attention versus somebody who really saw what they saw and experienced what they experienced?
Well, the beauty of the show is that it's in the caller's own voice, the experiencer's own voice. So you can hear right away whether or not it's affecting them. And it affects everybody different. Nerves hit people a different way, or, post-traumatic fear, post-traumatic stress, that kind of thing hits somebody a different way. So that's the first telltale right there. I can hear it in their voice. And I've done so many calls. I've listened to literally 10,000 calls probably since I've started doing the show. And now I know, it's just instant. I can hear it in the first 10 seconds what the person's, mentality is going into this. Some of the other things is if they include a lot of detail, then that's usually, not always, but it could be a sign, especially when it comes to like cryptids or Bigfoot, essentially. If every single Bigfoot trope is included in this story, I kind of raise red flags there. I'm like, this doesn't happen to anybody, and it's a little more far-fetched. But the reality of the situation is there's almost no calls that I won't play. And I don't go around picking ones because they sound more real than others. I pick mostly on subject. So it's just that the callers that call in are genuine. 99.9% of them are genuine. They want their story shared. And, they just want somebody to listen to them. They've had these experiences they can't explain, and they just want to get it off their chest, some closure on what took place. So, quite frankly, I don't think a lot of people are trying to fool me. Surprisingly
they probably,
enough.
In fact, they love your show because they feel a kinship with what's happening to people. And as you said, they need to share and be believed, and you offer them that opportunity. And that's fantastic.
Yeah. And it happens a lot where somebody will call in and say, this happened to me when I was a kid, and I've been terrified to talk about it my entire life. And last week you played a call that had the exact same story. The exact same thing happened to somebody else. And I just want to thank you for, sharing that and allowing me to feel like I'm not the only person on the planet that saw this glowing figure in my bedroom, or, whatever the case may be. Early on, I used to joke, and now I think it's a bit insensitive, but I used to joke it's paranormal therapy. Essentially, that's what it is. People come on to either hear about other things that they can correlate with their stories, or they point blank share it and they want reactions. They want to hear, am I crazy? Is this something that some other people have seen? And, that little verification goes a long way to help people feel a little bit more normal, I guess.
A little more normal in the paranormal. Yeah.
I suppose.
I don't think that it's insensitive to call it paranormal therapy. I mean, I think all of us yearn for a connection in the life that we're living and the experiences that we're having, a sense of community in the way that we perceive reality. I remember hearing some veterans talk about part of the reason people believe that World War II vets were able to handle PTSD better than Vietnam vets was that they all came home on a ship, and it took about a month to get home. And during that time, they were all together sharing their trauma and their experiences. And for Vietnam vets, they hopped on a plane, and 24 hours later, they were back in just the regular bucolic American world, and the reality break was just too intense.
And they were expected just to make that shift that nobody can make. I mean, obviously.
Right. So I think I think there really is something therapeutic about the opportunity to share your experience with other people who have been there. Not that I'm trying to equate war trauma with seeing Bigfoot, but I think the point is valid.
Some witnesses do, though. I should point that out, that some witnesses, to them, it's that life and death, that they thought they were going to die. And, I mean, that's the ultimate fear in war, isn't it? That you're going to lose your life or your loved ones will. So it's certainly, I see what you're saying by not equivalent, but to some of these witnesses it might be.
That makes sense. I mean, we all live in a subjective reality. It's impossible to gauge someone else's trauma.
Yeah.
Speaking of trauma, let's get back to our murder story. Freddie Kopic and Clayton Rumbaugh are driving out to Samoa to meet up with King to buy drugs, right? And as I had mentioned, and Rumbaugh on the drive, he's really working himself into a lather over that $2 in fake acid. Now, likely, this is not the first of many small clues that King ought to have heeded along the way that his dishonest dealing would eventually catch up to him. Now, on the drive, Rumbaugh shows Kopic a .22 caliber pistol and tells him he's going to kill Edward King for cheating him out of that $2 worth of LSD. Some folks really hold grudges, huh?
Yeah, it's over $2.
No, I mean, I guess adjusted for inflation from 1971, that $2 might be like $6 or $8, but yeah, still.
Probably 40, right? Honestly, but even still at $40, that's, wow.
So they meet up with King, they buy methamphetamine, then Kopic and Rumbaugh shoot up, and Kopic lures King to their car. King gets inside. Rumbaugh pulls out the .22, puts it against the back of King's skull, and shoots him in the head, execution style.
So no fake death.
No fake death. Although, as I pointed out at the start, this is Freddie Kopic's story. So we may or may not be able to rely on all the details. They drag the body out to the sand dunes. They bury it. Then, and this is just bizarre, but I guess they were, they had just intravenously ingested a huge amount of methamphetamine, so perhaps we're not expecting a lot of logical choices. After burying the body, they drive King's car back to his house, not bothering or at least failing to clean up the blood on the front seat that was transferred from their clothing, since they were all in Rumbaugh's car when King was shot and blood splattered everywhere. Now, Kopic tells the authorities he had previously concealed his knowledge of King's death and the whereabouts of the body out of fear for his life and the lives of his parents. Rumbaugh had threatened to kill them all if Kopic breathed the word of it. But, upon being arrested for King's murder and subsequently put on trial as an accessory to that murder, Kopic's fear of Clayton Rumbaugh fades, and he lays almost all the blame on Rumbaugh. Ultimately, Freddie Kopic is convicted as an accessory to Edward King's murder and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Many questions have been answered, and it seems the stories of Edward King and Freddie Kopic have by and large been told, but there are still a couple pointedly mysterious things out there. How, after almost a year, did authorities finally find King's body in the first place, number one? And again, what happened to Edward King's head? Kopic is certain that the head was on when they buried the body.
It's a classic mistake right there. I mean, I've done the same thing myself.
Forget to take the head off. Yeah, boy.
I forgot to take off the head.
I remembered my keys, my glasses, testicles, spectacles, wallet, and watch. Got those, but left the head on. Shit.
Did everything but take off the head and wipe up the blood. Boy. They almost got it.
Oh, boy. So how did they find the body? Where was the head? Well, for answers to those questions, we turn to the story of Clayton Rumbaugh. What became of that now 41-year-old Clayton Rumbaugh after that fateful night? Well, When Freddie Kopic tells his story, prior to his trial, the authorities immediately put out a bolo on Rumbaugh, who's apparently returned to Oregon. But they quickly discover that they're going to have to try Freddie Kopic first, because Rumbaugh is already in jail awaiting serious charges, other charges in Oregon. And the Humboldt authorities are going to have to wait their turn. They can't get their hands on Rumbaugh until his Oregon trial concludes. They make the rather dubious decision to just go ahead and try Freddie Kopic in the meantime, and as I mentioned, he's found guilty and given a 5-year sentence as an accessory to the murder of King, which Kopic claims was committed by Rumbaugh. So he is an accessory to Rumbaugh's crime. So what is the deal with Rumbaugh's Oregon charges, and what, if anything, do they have to do with the murder of Edward King? Well, the answer is a little bit of nothing and a little bit of everything. Fair warning, this story is about to take a turn for the even grosser. But at least we get to find out, 1, how the authorities found King's body, and 2, where that darn head went.
Now, you do a lot of these murder stories. How many of them involve a missing head?
That's a good question.
Is this normal?
Not as many as you think, although in one of my very first episodes, the killer was known as the Torso Killer. Not the famous Torso Killer out of Cleveland, actually, but a different Torso Killer.
Full disclosure, I'm not a big true crime guy, but when it comes to serial killers, I'm feeling like, all right, that's bordering on paranormal almost. So there's a little bit of interest there, but I don't believe so.
Right, so maybe it was the same guy then. And by the way, thank you for consenting to come on the show, despite your lukewarm interest in the topic.
No, I mean, I love all things creepy, and my wife loves true crime, so she's going to love this.
So what do these charges have to do with the story? Well, in some ways nothing, and in some ways everything. And as I mentioned, this story is about to get even grosser, so hang on to your seats or turn off the show or whatever you need to do, but here we go. Prior to being incarcerated and awaiting trial in Oregon, sometime before October 1972 when King's body was found, 41-year-old Rumbaugh is living in a trailer in Wilderville, Oregon, with his girlfriend, a Miss Smith. And Miss Smith is 15 years old. And here's where it really made my stomach turn. I read many articles about this story over many years, from 1968 to 1975 and beyond, and not at any point in this reporting is any mention made or any importance given to the fact that a 41-year-old man had a 15-year-old girlfriend. I mean, they state it as a fact, but nobody states it as being problematic. Now, I did some research, and I understand that as late as 1970, some news outlets in California, not related to this case, but just generally reported that the age of consent was 16. Still, she's 15. And in fact, the age of consent in California had been 18 since the year 1913. In Oregon, the age of consent was 16 until 1971 when it was raised to 18. But again, Rumbaugh's 41 and the girl is 15. So even in Oregon, this is bad. Essentially, Rumbaugh is a pedophile, which no one finds noteworthy. A pedophile living in a trailer in Wilderville, Oregon with his 15-year-old girlfriend. But that's not germane to the story or to his character or anything, according to the reporters, which just kind of blew my mind. So around October 4th, Smith and Rumbaugh travel from Wilderville, Oregon to Eureka. Rumbaugh tells Smith they're going to Eureka because he's been hired to kill a man there. Great guy. Now, he pays a 77-year-old man named Earl Au, A-U-E. I'm saying Au. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but that's the name. Pays him $100 to drive them to Crescent City, a town in Del Norte County about 85 miles north of Eureka. But when they get to Crescent City, Rumbaugh tells the 77-year-old he has to drive them to Eureka. And when Earl says, well, that wasn't the deal, Rumbaugh says, if you don't drive us to Eureka, I'll kill you. I've already killed one man and I'll kill another. So Earl drives him to Eureka.
Good choice. Maybe.
Remember, this is the 15-year-old girlfriend, and I hate to even call her that, but that's what the newspaper says. This is her story. Earl drops them off in Eureka. Rumbaugh takes Smith to a house, hands her a gun, rings the doorbell like a Ding Dong Dasher and tells Smith to shoot the man who answers the door. So he's immediately passing the buck on the hit he's been hired to do to his 15-year-old girlfriend.
Wow, what a guy.
I know, right? Jeez. Please, welcome to the family. But a woman answers the door and tells them the man they're looking for has moved away. Rumbaugh, back in Eureka, then becomes paranoid that the murder of Edward King will be traced to him because his .22 caliber bullet is still in King's skull. So he and Smith find their way to the Samoa Dunes, where Rumbaugh digs up King's skeleton and removes the head, which he puts in a pillowcase.
I thought you were going to say on his rearview mirror. He hangs it from his...
Yeah, like an air freshener, like one of those little Christmas trees. Oh my God. Whoo! That you know, there's probably a market for miniature severed head air fresheners, although I don't know what the scent would be.
Decay, probably.
Right.
Burnt leaves and decay.
By hook or by crook, they make it back to their trailer in Oregon, Rumbaugh with King's skull in the pillowcase, and he then hides the skull underneath his bed. This is going to get traced back to me, so I got to take the head, then goes and hides the skull under his own bed. Although, I guess he knows where it is that way, but, you know.
Unfortunately, he knows where it is. And let me interject really quick, if I may.
Yeah, please.
This is kind of where I come in, because when you start putting heads under beds, that's how you get ghosts. I mean, everybody knows that.
You're like, that's in the cookbook. That's in the Joy of Ghost Cooking. Yeah.
That's page 2, I'm pretty sure.
Oh my gosh, that's the darkest Shel Silverstein poem ever, right? Heads under beds.
My children's book will be out this fall.
Heads Under Beds.
Heads Under Beds.
Look for it on Amazon. Yeah. I'd read it.
I'd write it. So
let's do it. Do it. I'll be proud to promote it on the show here. Let's just go over these facts one more time. Rumbaugh's afraid the murder will be traced to him, so he travels across state lines from Oregon to California in a stranger's car, a stranger who he threatens to murder. Then he attempts to have his teenage girlfriend commit a murder for hire on his behalf. Then he digs up Edward King's corpse, removes the head, puts it in a pillowcase, and likely hitchhikes back to Oregon with the skull in a pillowcase across state lines again and hides it under his bed. What the F?
What's the timeline here? I'm a little foggy on when King died as opposed to when he was dug up and had his head removed. What's the difference in time there?
So he died on November 14th, 1971, and the authorities never found the body. Now, this is early October 1972, so it's about 11 months after the murder. And, you know, Derek, you put your finger right on it, because we've answered one of our key questions, which was, how did the authorities find King's body? Well, they found it after Rumbaugh dug it up. And question 2, what happened to King's head? Rumbaugh took it. It's almost like the Greek tragedy, the story of Oedipus. When you try to avoid your fate, it's those actions that bring your fate around and it drops on you like a hammer.
You're your own undoing.
Right. His fear of being found out and the actions he takes are the only reason they ever find the body in the first place. Before that, they basically had a missing person. All right.
Wow.
Again, what about those charges he was facing in Oregon, and what do they have to do with all this, right? Well, he was scheduled to be tried in Oregon, right, when the Humboldt authorities went looking for him. So what did he do to get arrested and scheduled for trial? Here's what he did. He went to Medford, Oregon, where he and Smith were visiting with a married couple when the husband allegedly made sexual advances towards Smith. Rumbaugh pulled a gun on the couple and held them hostage at gunpoint, while Smith mutilated the husband with a can opener.
Oof.
Those are the charges Rumbaugh is in jail awaiting trial for. And here's how it factors into Edward King. When Rumbaugh hears that the Humboldt authorities are looking for him in relation to King's killing, he's afraid, and rightfully so, obviously, that they'll find King's skull under his bed. So he calls a friend from jail and asks the friend to hide the skull for him. The friend retrieves the skull and hides it under a wash tub on his own property until 2 days later when the friend's nerve cracks and he tells the authorities about the skull. Meanwhile, Rumbaugh is convicted on the assault with a deadly weapon and kidnapping charges and sentenced to 5 years in prison. He's then taken to California to stand trial for the murder of Edward King. At this point, they move the trial from Eureka to Santa Rosa because local feeling and the notoriety of the case are running too hot. His trial, in May of 1972, results in a hung jury. How is that possible?
I was just thinking the same thing. I mean, it seems pretty cut and dry. He had the head under his bed, right?
Right. He did. Again, the disclaimer being the first part of this story is Kopic's version. The second part is Smith's version. But the fact that the head was under his bed and then under his friend's wash tub, which sounds like the worst bluegrass band ever, that's just a fact. That's an established fact. That's not anyone's version of the story. Well, we've been telling everyone's story, so here's Rumbaugh's. And it's fairly quick and simple. And it goes like this. Freddie Copic killed King, not me. I wasn't even there. Last time I saw King was 4 days earlier when I went to his apartment to buy some marijuana. I only knew where the body was because Freddie Copic showed me. I didn't even know the body was Edward King. And listen, I took the skull because I thought it would be a funny Halloween prank to play on my 15-year-old girlfriend. And I thought it would make a funny Halloween decoration, so I hid it under my bed. Then I asked my friend to move it because I realized how incriminating it would look when I found out they wanted me for King's murder.
And they bought this, or enough of them bought this to hang the jury.
Well, here's the thing, right? The American justice system is a piece of machinery that operates in a particular way. Rumbaugh was a piece of garbage, but he wasn't on trial for grave robbing. He wasn't on trial for desecrating a corpse, conspiracy to commit murder, murder for hire, statutory rape, or pedophilia. He was on trial for murder, and the jury felt that had not been proven, and they hung. Well, the state wasn't about to give up. He was tried again, and the second time, there was no hung jury. On January 24th, 1975, 4 years after the killing of Edward King, Rumbaugh, now 44, was acquitted for the murder of Edward King because the jury felt there was too much inconsistency in the testimony, and in particular that the state had failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Rumbaugh had killed King, or that Freddie Copic, who testified at Rumbaugh's trial, had not killed King. And so, Rumbaugh went to prison for 5 years for terrorizing the married couple in Medford, Oregon, and Freddie Copic did 5 years as an accessory to the murder of Edward King. As for the actual murderer of Edward King, no one was ever convicted.
Wow. That's disheartening, I'll be honest with you.
It sure is. And here's a couple things that really grabbed my imagination about this. One of them is almost a version of Double Jeopardy, which is because they couldn't try Rumbaugh and Copic simultaneously because of essentially a bureaucratic process where Oregon wouldn't give up Rumbaugh in time, and they decided to go forward with Copic's trial anyway. I mean, Copic's testimony was, look, I was there, but I didn't kill him. Rumbaugh did, I only helped. He was convicted as an accessory. So he was convicted as an accessory to the murder that Rumbaugh committed. That was the reason for his conviction. And yet, Rumbaugh himself was not convicted of that murder.
Yeah. It's like a catch-22 or something, right?
Right. Like, wouldn't you think they had to let Copic out or something? They didn't.
If we're honest, it sounds like all these people need to be behind bars,
Yeah.
in my opinion. But, yeah, I mean, based on what you said, it almost seems like they should be, he should have been released, because if there's no murder, I mean, they've decided that he wasn't, well, I guess they didn't decide he wasn't murdered. They just decided that, what was the gentleman's name? The pedophile guy?
Rumbaugh.
That's right. They just decided that he wasn't involved, apparently. So,
right,
wow.
Right. But Freddie was still convicted as an accessory to Rumbaugh murdering King, even though Rumbaugh apparently didn't.
Didn't do it. How wild.
I know, it's disheartening, and I find this a lot when I'm looking into stories. In season 1, there was a story where a man killed an elderly woman with a claw hammer, and by the time they caught him, he was already on a parole violation for robbery with a deadly weapon, and so he was looking at 5 years in prison for that, and essentially they had trouble or didn't feel like it was a clean-cut case to convict him for the murder, so they just said he's going to prison anyway, and they sent him back to prison for the parole violation on the 5-year bid for armed robbery. It seems like a similar decision was made here. The authorities just kind of said, meh, both these guys are going to prison anyway, but it's sad when there's no real importance given to the idea of justice for a victim.
Yeah. No matter what the victim was involved in.
Right. And here's where I think the state made a huge mistake in trying Rumbaugh, and especially trying him the second time. Because Rumbaugh, by the way, testified on his own behalf and told the story that I just shared with you about, I took the skull for a Halloween decoration and prank. They should never have let Freddie Kopic, they should never have had Freddie Kopic testify for the prosecution. Because if you just have Rumbaugh tell his story, then you essentially have one insane meth head telling a hardly credible, crazy-ass story that no one's going to believe.
Yeah.
But when you have Kopic testify, now you have another deplorable, insane meth head telling a crazy story. And now the jury gets to choose who they find more credible.
Yeah.
And even though both stories were absolutely fucking nuts, pardon my French, they found Rumbaugh more credible than Freddie. Oh,
it's hard to believe. The one thing I'd like to say is thankfully this was, 45, 50 years ago, but it hasn't really changed, quite honestly.
I don't think it's changed as much as we'd like to believe, especially not in terms of bureaucratic expediency. The path of least resistance, the conviction you can get or the paper you can get stamped, etc., is what you choose because you've got too many other cases to deal with.
Yeah.
Well, now that I've kind of bummed everyone out here, guess what, Derek? You get the enviable task of cheering everybody up, I guess. Do you have a...
I brought the wrong story.
Well, then don't worry about cheering them up. Let's just give them a break from me. Do you have a kind of murdery story you can share with us?
Well, I do. And this is a tragic story that I'm not involved in, but I was there for. Have you ever heard of Brian Schaefer out of Columbus, Ohio?
I haven't. Please educate me.
So essentially, Brian Schaefer was a 27-year-old medical student at Ohio State University, and he went to a bar that I frequented often while I don't think I was there the same night that he was, but he walked into the bar, had some talks, maybe had a drink or something. There's a video of him stepping into the bar. There's a video of him stepping out, having a word, stepping back in, and then he vanishes. They cannot find him anywhere.
I have heard of this story, but please continue. I don't know any of the details.
Sure. So I'll get into more detail here. So essentially, it took place on April 1st, 2006. 2006, I lived in Columbus at the time, and I frequented the bar that he went to. It was called the Ugly Tuna Saloona, and it was right on High Street, right over by Ohio State's campus. I went there all the time. I don't think I was there the night that he disappeared, thankfully. The police didn't question me, so I'm pretty sure I wasn't there.
Had you met him before?
No, I hadn't met him, or it's a big town. I mean, Columbus has a lot of people, so I was not familiar with the guy. I only saw the news report maybe a couple weeks later, and I was like, wait a minute, that's the bar I go to all the time. And so essentially, he came in at like 1:15 in the morning, and the way this bar is designed, it's inside a building. There's no street front access to it, so you have to walk in like a movie theater, go up these escalators, and at the top there's this like Chili's style bar.
So it's almost like a speakeasy of sorts or something.
It's really public. Like you can see clearly it's a bar. It's got a big neon sign, but you have to be inside the movie theater, or at least I think that's what it was at the time, and then go up these escalators and you walk right into the bar. There's no other way in or out that's public. There's
oh my gosh.
There's an access door in the back that I think is alarmed and doesn't. You have to like go through the kitchen and all this other stuff to get to this thing. So there shouldn't have been any reason that he got in there. But the police scoured videos from not only in the bar, outside the bar, in the movie theater, the streets around, because it was it's Columbus, Ohio State. There was a lot of street monitoring even back in 2006. They didn't find him leave that bar at any point.
Oh my gosh.
That entire evening.
Oh my gosh, what's the name of the bar?
Ugly Tuna Saloona.
Oh right, you said that. Okay,
yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
That's
So, like I said, I visited this place quite often. I went on dates and stuff there. It wasn't too far from where I lived. And that was the connection to me. Like when you see like news reports, I'm like, I've went up those steps 100 times. I've walked through this door. I've ordered a drink here 1,000,000 times. Like that's a place that I frequented. And to see somebody walk into this place and then just disappear is mind-boggling. There's nowhere for them to go.
Wow. And as an expert in strange occurrences, I feel like if anybody could come up with an imagination exercise to try to figure out what happened to him based on the fact that you were there all the time, I'm sure you've racked your brain about what could possibly have happened. Well, do you have any theories?
I guess. I mean, I'm not an expert on the case. I've done a little bit of research, and I brushed up on it this morning before we jumped on here just so I knew what I was talking about. He had a girlfriend. He was about to leave for Miami to go on spring break. His mother had died 3 weeks prior. And so a lot of people that aren't close to him think that it might be, taking his own life situation. But even still, how did he get out of the bar without, security cameras seeing him? And on top of that, there were security guards, 2 of them stationed right outside the door, and you can see them in the footage. So if there was some sort of foul play and they dragged the guy out of the bar, it would have been seen by these 2 security guards. So I'm not really a big fan of the taking his own life situation because what a weird place to even try it, and how would you even accomplish any of the things going on? So I can't help but think there was some sort of foul play.
And if you do take your own life, you obviously can't hide the body, right? So
yeah.
It seems like if he had taken his own life, he would have almost certainly been found.
But this is the middle of a city. I mean, we're not talking like rural areas.
Right.
I mean, this is the middle of Columbus. And there is a river nearby. I think it's like 6 blocks away, the Olentangy, which is a small river. It's not a deep river. You could probably walk across it without, waist deep water probably. And they searched it. They searched the sewers. They searched everything. Now, there's a little bit of weirdness that took place, and I didn't know this till today when I was brushing up, but I mentioned that he stepped out of the bar for a moment, and there was just kind of like a group of people like right outside the entrance and still in view of the cameras from the bar. And he's talking to a few people, and he had a girlfriend that he was supposed to go to Miami with the next morning. But he was still reportedly flirting with this new girl that he met and reportedly kissed her. So that's the little nugget of information that I needed to kind of go wild with my imagination. And I was thinking, well, if this girl had a boyfriend, a dangerous boyfriend, and he was somehow inside, but it's still, where did the body go?
Right.
If any of that took place, unless they threw him in the trash or something like that and he just simply got wheeled out. They were able to account for every single person that went in and every single person that went out except for Brian.
You've stumbled upon an inkling of a motive, but still the utter disappearance of the body.
There's a motive, but there's no bad guy. I don't know the right word for this.
Right. There's no.
I don't even know that this girl had a boyfriend. It's just a speculation that I made. This girl does exist. You can see her on the video, but outside of that, I don't know much about her. And, weirdly enough, too, at the time, or this morning when I was brushing up, I found a timeline, and it showed every bar that he went to that evening, and then where the last signal they got from his cell phone. And I'm incriminating myself. I'm not involved in this, but I went to half of the bars he went to regularly. I don't think I was out that night. This is April 1st. I can't think of any reason why I was at any of these bars. But then where he got his last ping was the town just outside of town. I lived in a suburb of Columbus that I lived in, Hilliard. So it was like right on my trail. When I saw that this morning, I'm like, man, this guy had the same circles I did.
Well, wow, you're brave. You're basically coming on a show called Kinda Murdery and heavily implying that it could have been you.
Well, it definitely couldn't have been me. I mean, there's video evidence there. But if that video didn't exist, I don't know if I'd be saying the things I'm saying. But it's wild. It's tragic to think that this up and coming guy. He was a med student. He seemed like a normal dude. He just disappeared like that. But it's also spooky to think I'm in these same places, and if this guy can disappear, then I could have easily, fell into the same fate.
Wow, yeah. Speaking of spooky, I'm dying to know more about what's coming up with Monsters Among Us and what's going on with Derek Hayes. Could you tell us a little more about that?
Sure. Well, like I said, the show comes back today, or I don't know what day this airs, but it comes back on Thursday. So we got another 20 some odd shows straight without a break. So
wow,
get ready for that. Buckle up. And I sat down throughout my whole break and listened to hundreds and hundreds of calls. So I have a whole new call bank for this season. I have some great calls, some Dogman calls, some really good Bigfoot calls. some ghost calls that really gave me the chills. So I'll be peppering all that stuff through this season. Also, it's not out yet. We don't have a date yet, but we are working on a documentary based on a strange area here in Southern California that we're dubbing the Borrego Triangle. Now, this is out in Anza-Borrego Desert State Park, which is San Diego County area. And we shot a documentary over the summer, and we're about to release it.
The Borrego Triangle? Sweet. I gotta learn more about that. Actually, I just moved to San Diego, so I guess I gotta find out where to go. Or, where not to go, I guess.
Maybe.
Man, Derek, thanks so much for being here with us. This has been an absolute blast.
I appreciate it, Zevin. Thank you.
For Derek Hayes, I'm Zevin Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery. I'll see you Thursday, February 2nd, for a brand new episode of Kinda Murdery.